We're just getting a bulletin word from China that a court there has just found Harry Wu guilty of spying. They have sentenced the American they've been holding in custody to 15 years in prison. The same bulletin, though, says he will be expelled from China. They don't put in context how that expulsion connects to the 15-year prison sentence. We'll update the story and clear it up as soon as more facts become available for you. As we mentioned earlier at the top of the newscast, word out of China tonight that a Chinese court has found human rights activist Harry Wu guilty of spying and other related charges. Chinese officials say the court has sentenced Wu to 15 years in prison. Wu has been imprisoned in China since June when he was arrested as he tried to cross the border into his native country. He is now an American citizen, in fact a scholar at the Hoover Institution and a well-known critic of China's human rights policies. Tonight's official report out of China also says that Wu will be expelled from China, but it is still unclear if he's going to have to serve any or all of that sentence before that expulsion takes place. Bay TV talked with his wife tonight, Ching Li. She says she's not going to make any comments at all publicly until she gets some information from the State Department.
Live from KTVU, this is the award-winning 10 o'clock news on Channel 2, the #1 primetime newscast in the country.
Good evening, I'm Elaine Corral.
And I'm Dennis Richmond. There is word out of China tonight on the fate of Bay Area human rights activist Harry Wu. The Chinese government had arrested Wu and put him on trial for spying, an action that has fueled tensions between China and the U.S. government. Tonight, the official Chinese news agency says Wu has been found guilty of spying and illegally providing state secrets to overseas institutions. The Chinese court sentenced Wu to 15 years in prison and ordered him expelled from the country. Wu was detained as he tried to enter China June 19th. He was formally arrested on June 8th and charged with spying. Shortly after that, official Chinese reports say Wu confessed. Well known as a human rights activist, Wu spent 19 years in Chinese prisons from the mid-60s to the mid-80s. For the past 10 years, he and his wife have lived in the South Bay city of Milpitas, where tonight the mayor of that city spoke for Mrs. Wu.
I've said that they have nothing definitive at this time, and they're hoping that he will be expelled and he won't have to serve any of the time. But once again, until we have official word, all we can do is hope and pray.
Again, what is not clear tonight is whether Wu will have to serve any of his 15-year sentence before he is expelled from China. There is speculation that he will be expelled immediately. That's because the Chinese government is hosting a United Nations conference on women next month. First Lady Hillary Clinton is scheduled to attend, but has withheld making a final decision until the Wu matter is resolved.
From KPIX Channel 5, this is Eyewitness News at 10.
Good evening, I'm Kate Kelly.
And I'm Dave McElhatton. A Bay Area human rights activist is convicted of espionage in China. Harry Wu is sentenced to 15 years in prison and expulsion. Good evening. The announcement came from the official Chinese news agency about 3 hours ago. Tonight, Harry Wu's family and friends in Milpitas are still waiting for official word. We'll take you there live for reaction in a moment. First, the big question. Will Harry Wu have to serve any of his sentence before he's allowed to come home?
Harry Wu's arrest June 19th brought official and unofficial protests from the United States. He was taken into custody June 19th while trying to enter China from Kazakhstan. The Chinese government later released a tape of a purported confession. Harry Wu spent 19 years in Chinese labor camps before emigrating to the United States in 1985. Since then, he has returned on missions to expose human rights violations in China, using prison labor to produce goods for export, and even selling the organs of executed prisoners. His sentencing today comes as thousands of women are arriving in China from around the world for an international women's conference. Hillary Clinton has postponed a commitment to attend. Harry Wu's wife was one of many voices urging her not to go.
She cannot escape the fact that her presence confers greater prestige upon China than any other people in the delegation.
Wu is a fellow of the Hoover Institution and lives with his wife, Ching Li Wu, in Milpitas. Tony Rusomano has just spoken with her. Tony?
Kate, Harry Wu's wife, Ching Li, spent the evening battling her emotions, according to a family friend, inside the Wu house here in Milpitas. And a few minutes ago, Mrs. Wu came out to read a prepared statement.
I have been advised by the State Department that a few hours ago, the Wuhan court issued a verdict of guilty concerning the charges filed against my husband. They sentenced him to 15 years in the Laogai and expulsion. We do not know if the Chinese government intends to expel him soon or after serving his sentence. While I have no concrete information to provide a basis for my feelings, I remain hopeful that the Chinese government will expel Harry in the near future.
And as word of Wu's conviction spread among his family and friends, they began congregating here at the house in Milpitas. Also, members of his human rights organization spent the evening on the phone trying to get as much information as they could. You heard Mrs. Wu say she heard briefly from the State Department just a little while ago. And Milpitas's mayor, Pete McHugh, came here a little while ago also to urge that the First Lady Hillary Clinton not go to the Women's Conference in China if Harry Wu is not released. But he said that he believed the political pressure on the Chinese government regarding that Women's Conference was directly responsible for the action on the Harry Wu case so far. Dave and Kate?
Well, Tony, did Mrs. Wu say anything about what the family plans to do? Are they trying to continue to lobby through the State Department?
No, there was no other comment besides her prepared statement, and she was very clear that because of the situation and the delicacy of the situation, she wanted to stick just to what she wrote.
All right, thanks very much, Tony. Well, here's where things stand right now on the Harry Wu story. The official Chinese news agency says he was sentenced to 15 years in prison and expulsion. The Clinton administration won't comment until it is official word of the verdict, but privately the White House says unless he is freed, First Lady Hillary Clinton will not go to China for an international women's conference next month.
This is News Center 4 Nightbeat, your 24-hour news service.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Pam Moore. Pete Wilson is off this evening. Thank you for staying up with us. Well, the verdict is in, but the questions remain about the future of Chinese dissident Harry Wu. The Bay Area resident imprisoned since June is now a convicted spy. But it's unclear if he's headed for home or for a Chinese prison. Nightbeat's Carl Sonkin is standing by at Wu's Milpitas home with the very latest. Carl?
Inside, some cautious optimism and yet certainly a lot of unknowing at this point how long Harry Wu will be away, whether he will have to spend an entire 15 years in prison before he is expelled, or if he will be coming home soon. Late in the evening, Harry's wife Ching Li agreed to share her worries with TV and radio reporters.
We do not know if the Chinese government intends to expel him soon or after serving his sentence.
Human rights activist Harry Wu was arrested in China 2 months ago, tried and convicted of spying charges this morning.
Harry's trial was closed to the public.
Wu had helped produce a documentary on Chinese labor camps.
Harry is a dedicated human rights activist who has made the Chinese government extremely angry.
We got a phone call from a reporter about half an hour ago, and I haven't before. Channel 4. Yeah.
Earlier, a family spokesman told reporters that family members were inside Wu's neat Milpitas house with a yellow ribbon on the mailbox, trying to learn more about the case.
The question, and I don't think anyone has the answer yet, is will he have to serve some or all of that time before expulsion?
The Milpitas mayor, who's helped organize the Free Harry campaign, says Wu's jailing is an embarrassment to the Chinese government, which would like Hillary Rodham Clinton to come to a women's conference in Beijing.
It would be in the best interests of China, the United States, and Harry that he be expelled immediately and returned home.
Before leaving reporters, Ching Li Wu said she's worried about her husband's back problems, which can only be treated in the United States. Ching Li says that there was a report that even though the trial was closed, Harry had to be helped into the trial by 2 Chinese officials. Meanwhile, the yellow ribbons are still up on the mailbox. Harry is not home yet. Back to you now, Pam.
All right, thank you, Carl, for that report. By the way, this story is changing by the hour, and we'll update as is warranted during the newscast and, of course, in our hourly updates.
KGO-TV Channel 7, #1 in Northern California. Now Terrell and Joe, Richard Brown, Brian Hackney Weather, and Martin Wyatt Sports. This is Channel 7 News at 11.
A Bay Area human rights activist is found guilty of spying in China. Harry Wu has just been sentenced to 15 years in prison. The announcement came from the Chinese government tonight, guilty as charged. Harry Wu had returned to China to do what he had dedicated his life to, exposing China's penal colonies. The Milpitas resident had gone into China before using disguises, fictitious names. This time he got caught. Now he could spend 15 years in prison. Channel 7's Juju Chang is in Milpitas at his home tonight, joins us live. Juju?
Richard, there are still yellow ribbons here at the Milpitas home of human rights activist Harry Wu. The house has been abuzz with activity ever since word of the conviction came down several hours ago. The mayor of Milpitas was here to offer his support, and a number of Chinese human rights activists have been huddled inside. They've been taking phone calls from U.S. State Department officials in Washington, D.C., because even though the Chinese government has sentenced Harry Wu to 15 years in prison, they also said he's to be expelled from the country. Now, it's unclear whether that expulsion would take place before or after he serves his prison term. So right now, U.S. officials in Beijing are still working frantically to win the release of Harry Wu.
We continue to believe that it would be in the best interests of China, the United States, and Harry that he be expelled immediately and return home.
The soft-spoken wife of Harry Wu has led protests here in the Bay Area to call attention to the plight of her husband ever since he was taken into custody by Chinese officials more than 2 months ago. Harry Wu spent 19 years hard labor in Chinese prison camps and has worked tirelessly to expose human rights abuses in those prisons since moving to the United States 10 years ago. Wu is currently a Hoover Institute scholar and has gone back to China several times to uncover abusive labor conditions in Chinese prisons.
Harry is a dedicated human rights activist who has made the Chinese government extremely angry. Through Harry's treatment, the Chinese government is sending a clear message to the world.
The friends and family of Harry Wu, including the mayor of Milpitas, are urging that First Lady Hillary Clinton not attend next week's international conference in Beijing. It's the UN-sponsored Women's Conference on Women's Issues. Mrs. Clinton's attendance is still an open question at this point, and activists here are saying that if Harry Wu is not released, Mrs. Clinton should stay at home. Richard?
Juju, any reaction from the State Department tonight about the way the trial was conducted?
Well, at this point, Mrs. Wu has been somewhat critical about the way the trial was conducted. She said even though consular officials were able to attend, it lasted just a few hours and was closed to the public. Mrs. Wu is also very concerned about the condition of Harry Wu's back. She's hoping he can get medical attention back here in the United States.
All right, Juju, thank you. Juju Chang live tonight from Milpitas.
Live from KTVU, Mornings on Cue, the #1 morning newscast in the Bay Area.
Okay, time to get up. 7 a.m. on the dot, and you can see the morning fog and clouds out there, but it should burn off pretty soon, and we can look forward to clear skies and lots of sunshine later on today.
Right now, there are some big problems on the Bay Area highways, and on Wall Street, the Dow is up 5 points, NASDAQ is down 1 point. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Mornings on 2. I'm Laura Zimmerman.
And I'm Frank Somerville. Ross has the day off today, and it is Thursday, August the 24th, and it's a day that begins with new and concerning questions about the future of Harry Wu. Last night, a court in Beijing sentenced the human rights activist to 15 years in prison, but the court also ordered Wu expelled from China. And exactly what this means is still not clear. Filmmaker Gary Kauf is at Wu's home in Milpitas and joins us now live with more. Gary.
Bright yellow ribbons line the road and lead the way to Harry Wu's house here in the city of Milpitas. And there is new word this morning that Wu could be home in weeks. Now, all this comes after a Chinese court convicted Wu, who is an American citizen, of spying and leaking state secrets and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Wu has spent decades documenting abuses in Chinese prison camps. After that harsh sentence was issued, however, word trickled out that Wu was also to be expelled from China as part of the sentence, that the expulsion could come within a month, apparently if Wu behaves himself, read that, keeps quiet. Adding credence to that report, Wu's attorney says he's decided not to appeal the sentence, though previously he said he definitely would.
They have nothing definitive at this time, and they're hoping that he will be expelled and he won't have to serve any of the time. But once again, until we have official word, all we can do is hope and pray.
Now, the 58-year-old Wu emigrated to the United States in 1985. That was after spending 19 years in Chinese prison camps. He flew back to China a couple of months back to talk about those abuses, to publicize them. He was immediately jailed. Now, his wife issued a statement late last night saying it would be in the best interests of everyone if Harry was expelled immediately. Now, all of this, of course, comes on the eve of a World Conference on Women's Rights, which is to be held in Beijing next month, and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton is expected to attend that. So perhaps all of this will work out. The timing will work out perfectly. We will find out. That's the story in Milpitas. Back to you, Lauren Frank.
Live from KTVU, Mornings on 2. The #1 morning newscast in the Bay Area.
And welcome to the second hour here on Mornings on 2. I'm Frank Somerville.
And I'm Laura Zimmerman. Good morning to you. Ross is off today. It is Thursday, August the 24th. And it is a day that begins with conflicting signals from China about the future of Harry Wu. The human rights activist has been sentenced to 15 years in prison in China. But officials have also called for his expulsion. Our field anchor Gary Kauf is joining us live now from the Wu home in Milpitas with more on what it could all mean. Gary?
Bright yellow bows have been tied to most of the mailboxes here on Fontainebleau Court. That's neighbors' way of showing their support for the jailed human rights activist Harry Wu. Wu is an American citizen. Despite that, he was sentenced Thursday morning, China time, to 15 years in prison and expulsion for spying. There are reports this morning that say he may actually be released within weeks, however, if Wu behaves himself. Now, the verdict from the court reads, there are two possibilities. If his attitude is good and he is well behaved, he could be released early and expelled. The other possibility is he will be expelled after serving 15 years. One of Wu's lawyers has told Reuters News Service that he thinks Wu could be deported as early as this month, saying the court has found his attitude to be good, but no final decision has been made.
They have nothing definitive at this time, and they're hoping that he will be expelled and he won't have to serve any of the time. But once again, until we have official word, all we can do is hope and pray.
Now, Wu's attorney says Wu wrote the Chinese government a letter saying that all the charges against him are factual, and he expressed his remorse in that letter. That's according to the attorney. Wu immigrated to the United States in 1985. Before that, he spent 19 years in Chinese labor camps, and he has spent about 20 years documenting the abuses in those camps. He went back to China in June, was immediately jailed, and this entire sequence of events began then. That's your update from here. Laura and Frank.
All right, Gary Kauf live in Milpitas this morning. 8:00.
Celebration in Milpitas this hour as months of imprisonment end in a speedy trial and a ticket home for Bay Area human rights activist Harry Wu.
This is News Center for Midday, your 24-hour news service.
Good news this midday. Bay Area human rights activist Harry Wu is heading home from a Chinese jail. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Blake. Emerald is off this midday. That is our top story. Harry Wu is on a plane and he's due to arrive back here in the Bay Area early this afternoon. This after China just put him on trial for espionage and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. It is the end of a 2-month-long ordeal for Wu's family in Milpitas. And that's where we catch up with News Center 4's Mark Mullen. He's live in Milpitas. Mark?
Susan, what an incredible morning for people who live in this house. They had already heard that Harry Wu was sentenced to 15 years in prison and that he was to be expelled from China. What they did not know is whether he would have to do the jail time first. Then about 10:15 this morning, they got an official call from the State Department. The message, Harry is on the way home.
And I'm so happy. Yes, thank you very much.
Nothing but joy at the Wu household as they got the good news this morning.
The State Department has confirmed the release of Harry Wu, my husband. So he will return soon. Return home here in America. I'm too happy to really tell my feelings. And I want to thank all of those who helped with the rescue of my husband.
Wu was taken into custody June 19th at a Chinese border crossing and charged with spying. Chinese officials were upset with him because he previously helped document the alleged abuse of Chinese prisoners. Wu himself spent 19 years in Chinese labor camps for criticizing their government, that before immigrating to the U.S. The Free Harry Wu campaign was fueled by his wife and friends and local officials before becoming an international issue. The Deputy Secretary of State was set to meet with Chinese officials on the matter tomorrow, and Hillary Clinton had not committed to attending next week's International Women's Conference in Beijing. That may have done the trick.
What are you going to say to your husband when you see him?
Welcome home.
Well, if Harry Wu does decide to do another covert mission to China, he certainly could have to serve out that 15-year term. Apparently, the country of China put that in as a deterrent to try and keep Harry Wu from meddling in their affairs. Now, when will he come home? One estimate says 1:45 this afternoon. There's a conflicting report. It may be a little bit later. It is at least an 18-hour journey, but sometime within the next 48 hours. I asked Harry Wu's wife, how do you plan to celebrate? And they said they're not so sure. They said they had planned for just about everything but a release this soon. Susan.
Yeah, it was easy to see. It was very hard for her to contain all of her excitement. All right, Mark, thanks for the live report. Also, as Mark mentioned, Wu's expulsion does now open the door for First Lady Hillary Clinton to travel to Beijing for the UN Women's Conference scheduled for next month.
KGO-TV Channel 7, #1 in Northern California. Now Don Sanchez, Cheryl Jennings, Lee Glasser weather, and Dr. Dean Edel. This is Channel 7 News at 11:30.
Good morning. Late word out of China this morning that Harry Wu is a free man.
The Chinese government announcing this morning that it is expelling Harry Wu. Bay Area human rights activist reportedly has left China. Wu was convicted late last night of espionage and sentenced to 15 years in prison.
It took a Chinese court just 4 hours to convict Wu. There were no witnesses. Wu was captured in June. He had angered the Chinese government by producing television reports about China's prison labor system.
In Chinese forced labor camp, representatives in China have two performers, labor performers, political performers. If your performers not satisfied, not meet the condition, and they will increase your sentence, and you never come out anymore.
Shortly after his arrest, the Chinese government released a video of Wu being interrogated. He appears to confess, but experts say the translation is fabricated. This morning, Chinese officials said justice had run its course. They denied any political motivation for the quick conviction.
It is the Chinese judiciary exercising its independent power in accordance with China's sovereignty. Therefore, this case or verdict has nothing to do with Sino-U.S. relations.
There was speculation China wanted to resolve the matter before the United Nations Conference on Women in Beijing next month. The Chinese government wants First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton to attend. That was unlikely unless Harry Wu was freed.
Well, for reaction to this morning's news, let's join Channel 7's Leanne Melendez. She's at the Wu home in Milpitas. Leanne?
Well, John, Wu's wife, Ching Li, said she didn't know exactly when her husband was arriving back here in the Bay Area. She had actually less information than we did. She did say, though, that it would be in the best interest of China, the United States, and her husband that he be expelled immediately and returned home. Let's hear her.
He will return soon. Return home here in America. I'm too happy to really tell my feelings. And I want to thank all of those who helped with the rescue of my husband.
And again, Wu was convicted, as you mentioned, Don, of spying and leaking state secrets. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and expelled. Now, the Chinese government has apparently decided to expel him before serving that sentence. And, of course, the U.S. government has asked for further clarification on this. The Chinese government has apparently decided to show its sincerity in wanting to mend the relations with the United States. Wrapping up things here in Milpitas, once again, Harry Wu has been expelled from China, and he is on his way back to the Bay Area. When, we don't know exactly, but we'll keep you informed. We'll have a live report at 5 and 6.
happy ending. Leanne Melendez, thank you for that live update.
What are you going to say to your husband when you see him?
Welcome home.
The wife of human rights activist Harry Wu is celebrating this afternoon. Her husband is out of prison in China and headed home. We'll have the very latest live next on the Noon News.
Now, live, the award-winning KTVU News team and the Noon News.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Zimmerman.
And I'm Frank Somerville, and we begin this noontime with a major development concerning jailed activist Harry Wu. This morning, Chinese authorities expelled him from the country, and he is now on a flight back to the Bay Area. As you might imagine, his family and friends are about as happy as you can get, and Dolores Canizaro is in Milpitas now and joins us with more on their reaction. Dolores.
Frank, they are very happy. Qingli Wu held an impromptu news conference here on her front lawn just about an hour and a half ago. She thanked reporters who have been covering the story of her husband, human rights activist Harry Wu, and his arrest and imprisonment in China. She said she believes the U.S. government was most responsible for her husband's release. Then Mrs. Wu told us how a colleague of her husband took the phone call from the State Department this morning confirming Harry Wu's release.
He said, okay, you sit down. I tell you something. You sit down here. And then he told me. And I'm so happy. Yes, thank you very much.
Mrs. Wu says she believes her husband is either in Shanghai now or perhaps even in the air on his way back home. Harry Wu was detained on June 19th in China, then arrested on charges of espionage. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but hours after he was convicted and sentenced, he was expelled from the country. Wu spent 19 years in Chinese labor camps before immigrating to the U.S. Since then, he has worked tirelessly to document abuses in Chinese prisons.
He worked very hard and tried to expose the horror of the Laogai camp. I think from now on, his work will be more easier. I hope so, yes.
Mrs. Wu says she continues to be concerned about her husband's health. The last picture she saw of him, she said he appeared to be too weak to stand for any length of time, and that concerns her. They have made a doctor's appointment for him. At this point, she says they haven't made any specific plans for her husband's homecoming, but she says the first words she will say to him, simply, welcome home. Frank and Laura?
All right, Dolores Canizaro, thanks for that report. Well, the Bay Area and the nation, of course, are both anxiously waiting for Wu's return. For more on the details of his homecoming, we want to take you now to the San Francisco airport. Reporter Gary Kauf is standing by with more. Gary?
Well, China Airlines Flight 004 is now due in at 1:46 this afternoon, and it is possible, if not likely, that Harry Wu is aboard that flight. Now, China is 15 hours ahead of San Francisco. The flight is nonstop from Taipei. It's an 11-hour flight. The flight, which is an MD-11 jumbo jet, has 300 people aboard. It left Taipei at 5 in the afternoon Thursday. That's China time. Now, that means Wu would have been sentenced in the morning and expelled almost immediately. And remember, he would have had to have been put on a flight from Beijing to Taipei first. In any case, he'll still have to clear customs here at SFO, though considering all of the attention his case has gotten, it's possible that he may be walked through. We haven't heard of any special arrangements, but there has been extra security out here ever since the Unabomber scare. Now, again, we're not positive he is on this China Airlines flight. A couple of news organizations have said yes, he is. It's also possible that he'll be coming in on a 7 o'clock flight this evening. We'll find out this afternoon. Frank and Laura.
All right, Gary Kauf live from SFO. Of course, news of Wu's expulsion is also being greeted with approval in the U.S. Capitol this afternoon. The move is likely to ease political tensions between the U.S. and China. Our Washington, D.C. bureau chief, Andy Castles, has more now for us in a live report. Andy?
Well, Frank and Laura, I guess you could say, how do you spell relief? Because that's obviously the feeling here in Washington today. The Wu detention had become a major problem, especially for the White House. And as you know, Mrs. Clinton had been under tremendous pressure from Republicans in particular to boycott that upcoming UN Women's Conference in Beijing. But now, apparently, that pressure has been relieved, and it is business as usual.
At issue is China's reputation as a host.
The decision to expel Harry Wu removes a major obstacle in the path of U.S.-Chinese relations. It was an obstacle that likely would have forced the First Lady to boycott the upcoming women's conference, damaging relations even further. So all over town today, you could literally hear the sighs of relief.
There's a very clear message. The Chinese government does respond to pressure.
The State Department had said getting Wu out of China was its #1 priority. While his trial had been expected, the speed with which he was expelled seemed to catch everyone by surprise. Prior to hearing of the Wu release, state officials insisted that no deals had been made.
I mean, we knew that the trial was taking place, but there has been, to the best of my knowledge, no deal or anything the way that you describe it.
There's been no word from the White House on what the Wu release will mean to Mrs. Clinton's plan. The expectation is she will now go forward with arrangements to visit Beijing. And many see that visit as a chance to further correct human rights violations.
I think the Women's Conference clearly needs to be the focus. We believe that all along, that women do deserve this conference. It's a UN conference, but at the same time, the pressure needs to stay on China.
Now, Wu's release today comes as Undersecretary of State Peter Tarnoff arrives in China in an attempt to patch up U.S.-Chinese relations. Obviously, the job now is going to be just a bit easier. Frank, Laura?
All right, Andy Castle's live from Washington. Now, in case you're just joining us, we want to recap our top story today. Human rights activist Harry Wu is on his way back to the United States and the Bay Area at this hour. His return follows a Chinese government expulsion, which was reported just hours ago. The Milpitas resident is expected to arrive at San Francisco International Airport at about 1:50 this afternoon. However, the time has yet to be confirmed. You can stay with Channel 2 for complete live coverage of Wu's homecoming.
From KPIX Channel 5, this is Eyewitness News at noon.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marcia Brandt.
And I'm Bill Schechner. Windows arrives. Do we really care?
Well, you can charge it at the post office now, and Larry Hagman seems to be doing well, and we're going to get back to those stories in just a moment.
But first, we're going to start with Harry Wu. He is the Milpitas man who was jailed in China but now released, and according to one source, is on a plane due in San Francisco in a little more than an hour and a half. How he got out of China is quite a story. In a way, you could say he was traded for Hillary Clinton. Listen, here it comes. These are pictures distributed by Chinese state television of Harry Wu in court yesterday. While we watch, let's catch up to his story. He left China in 1985 after 19 years in forced labor camps, imprisoned for speaking out for democracy. But he slipped back in, and with a hidden camera, he took pictures of the camps where he was imprisoned. He wanted to let the world know what it was like. He was discovered, arrested, charged with spying, tried, convicted, sentenced to 15 years, and then they threw him out. Why did they let him go? His case was linked to the UN Women's Conference that starts next week in China. With Wu in jail, Hillary Rodham Clinton was not likely to attend. That would be a blow to China. So what seems to have happened? The Chinese decided to trade Harry Wu for Hillary Clinton's presence.
So that is what we know. Now let's see if we can get some confirmation about what we've been told will be Harry Wu's arrival in San Francisco. Cheryl Hurd is at Wu's house in Milpitas, where his wife spoke with reporters this morning. Cheryl?
Good afternoon, Marcia. The Wu family breathing a collective sigh of relief. We are told by the State Department that he is in the air and that he will arrive at SFO, about 1:30. Now, the ribbons you see tied here in front of the home symbolized his imprisonment. Now they symbolize his release. Everything seems to be happening so quickly. Wu's wife, Ching Li Wu, hasn't seen her husband in months, at least since June when he was jailed for spying. These pictures show a little bit of what he's got in trouble for, documenting prison situation in China. This morning when Mrs. Wu talked to reporters, she was lost for words.
I'm too happy to really tell my feelings. And I want to thank all of those who helped with the rescue of my husband.
It makes you know that Harry's work is important, it's appreciated, and now as he comes back, his voice will be louder and stronger than ever.
He worked very hard and tried to expose the horror of the Laogai camp. I think from now on, his work will be more easier. I hope so. Yes.
Mrs. Wu shook hands with every reporter out here, thanking them for their help. She was asked what would she do if her husband wanted to continue his work in China. She smiled, she hesitated, and she says, "I will support my husband." That's the word from here. The Wu family hasn't been out for at least an hour. We were wondering if they will be going to the airport. If they do, they should be leaving soon. Reporting live in Milpitas, I'm Cheryl Hurd. Marcia, back to you.
Cheryl, are we pretty sure that he's on that flight? Because there has been some confusion here about whether he's really on this 145 flight.
We did ask Mrs. Wu, and she said that she is hearing the same thing. We also got word from the State Department, but that seems to be the word. We're not absolutely sure, but that's the latest word that we have.
All right, thanks very much, Cheryl. So here's what we know. Harry Wu sentenced to 15 years hard labor, but was then expelled from China. It seems to be in order to pave the way for Hillary Clinton to attend the UN Women's Conference. Wu is said to be on a plane due in San Francisco at about 1:45 this afternoon.